Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really zeroing in on Vice President Vance, specifically his recent actions, but also what he's thinking about them.
Right. We've got a mix here, his own sort of internal reflections on some key events alongside, the media coverage.
Exactly. So the goal is to get past the headlines, understand his approach a bit better, maybe his motivations, and definitely the impact, both internationally and here at home.
And there's some, surprising moments in his internal thoughts, some real conflict there, and how the world reacted too.
Okay, let's dive right in. February 2025, that White House meeting with Ukraine's President Zelensky. Vance's own thoughts suggest he went in, well, pretty aggressively.
Yeah, he felt Zelensky was, and this is his phrasing, playing the war hero card, trying to guilt trip America. He was thinking America first.
So a very defined stance from the get-go.
And that internal justification is key, isn't it? He talks about wanting to deliver a knockout punch for Trump, for America as he saw it.
It really shows that loyalty aspect, but manifesting as quite confrontational.
Definitely. And apparently, he told Zelensky straight up he was out of line for criticizing the administration publicly. Said he should be grateful.
Wow, and the reaction.
Described as just a frozen stare. But here's where it gets interesting about Vance immediately felt regret, almost instantly.
That quick turnaround is telling, from forceful to self-critical.
Absolutely. He specifically mentions his own low agreeableness, which basically means he tends to prioritize his own views over, say, finding common ground.
Right, less concerned with pleasing the other person in that moment.
And he worried his performative ego took over. So when the media called him rude, aggressive, the whole Vance tanks talks thing.
It seems like that actually echoed his own internal critique.
It really does. And it wasn't just the media, was it? You had figures like Senator Graham actually praising him.
Yeah, Graham, despite being pro-Ukraine generally, said Vance was standing up for our country, even suggested Zelensky should think about resigning.
Quite a statement. But then you had Senator Tuberville with that really harsh comment, calling Zelensky a Ukrainian weasel.
Very different tone. And Congressman Lawler saw it more pragmatically, just a missed opportunity for the U.S. and Ukraine to connect.
And if you tie this back to that BBC analysis...
Yes, the attack dog role.
Exactly. They contrasted him sharply with someone like Mike Pence, who was much more behind the scenes. The BBC said Vance is unafraid to take center stage.
It makes you think about how that VP role itself might be changing.
It does. And the BBC also noted, importantly, that Zelensky had engaged with Democrats before visiting a factory in PA, meeting Kamala Harris.
So Vance's accusation about only siding with Democrats adds another layer of, well, tension to that whole meeting.
Definitely complicates the picture.
Okay, let's shift to mid-February the 14th, the Munich Security Conference speech. His internal thoughts paint him as a bit of a lone wolf.
Yeah, wanting to, quote, shake up the European elites. He felt they were snooty and disliked the whole America First thing.
That lone wolf idea, again, emphasizes him acting outside the usual diplomatic playbook, a disruptor role.
Very much so. His dominant traits seem front and center there. He wasn't just making points, he was aiming for impact, maybe even controversy.
And the content was strong, criticizing Europe over free speech crackdowns, immigration.
He really didn't hold back, accusing them of censoring free speech, failing to control immigration, even saying leaders were running in fear of your own voters. Strong stuff.
And comparing current leaders to Cold War figures.
Yeah.
And criticizing Germany's approach to the AfD party.
Right. And what's striking is how he seemed to downplay threats from Russia and China, focusing instead on this internal threat from within Europe.
That's a major shift from traditional U.S. foreign policy, isn't it?
Huge shift. And then meeting with the ASD leader, Alice Weidel, right after that speech. Well, that just fueled the fire.
Predictably, the European media reaction was intense. Vance backs far right. U.S. VP slams Europe. Headlines like that.
But even as he was making this bold, maybe provocative statement, he apparently had this moment of internal doubt, thinking he might have just made Trump's overall Europe strategy tougher.
There's that internal conflict again, the confrontational instinct versus the potential consequences.
Exactly. And his online spat with Niall Ferguson, using terms like moralistic garbage, globalist, suggests he was really digging in his heels even after the initial reaction.
And it wasn't just continental Europe. He took a surprise shot at the UK Prime Minister, too, over free speech and tech companies.
Which adds another layer. The German defense minister calling the speech unacceptable really sums up the diplomatic fallout.
CNN called it a blistering assault, rejecting liberal ideas, minimizing external threats. A Pretty accurate summary, it sounds like.
It does. But then you have President Trump's reported reaction. He thought the remarks were brilliant.
So alignment there, at least publicly.
It suggests so. And Vance trying to link European immigration policies to that Munich car attack, that really hammers home his focus on what he sees as Europe's internal problems.
Okay, let's switch gears again. April 14th. Something seemingly lighter, the Ohio State Buckeyes football team visiting the White House.
Right. Vance, feeling his Ohio proud moment, wanted that perfect photo op, reached for the trophy.
And, oops, it broke.
Yeah. And his internal reaction is fascinating. Not so much about the trophy, but immediate panic about looking dumb.
Tried to cover with a joke, maybe?
Seems like it. But internally, he was apparently really annoyed with his impulsive side and worried again about his low agreeableness affecting how the team felt.
And the media reaction.
Oh, they ran with it, clumsy, a clown, that sort of thing. He was also worried apparently about the optics for Trump.
How it reflects on the administration.
But what's really revealing is his own realization afterwards. He felt he'd made the moment about himself, not the team.
Overlooked their achievement because he wanted the photo op. That performance instinct getting in the way.
Exactly. That seems to be a recurring theme he recognizes in himself.
So across all these incidents, Zelensky, Munich, the trophy, his own reflections show this consistent, well, what he calls a boxing ring mentality.
This drive to prove loyalty, to be assertive.
Yeah.
And he seems quite aware of his perceived flaws. Dominance, impulsiveness, that performative streak, and the low agreeableness.
And he connects those traits directly to the outcomes, doesn't he?
He does. He sees how they likely caused friction with Zelensky, stirred things up perhaps too much in Munich. Even the trophy thing, while minor geopolitically, was a personal embarrassment stemming from that impulsiveness.
His comment about being unsuitable for a role in, say, China because he's too outspoken, that shows real self-awareness about his style.
Definitely. He understands his communication style might not fit everywhere.
So it sounds like he's constantly wrestling with this, his natural, more combative instincts versus the requirements of the VP role, which often needs more diplomacy.
Precisely. He sees the potential downsides of just letting those instincts run wild.
Okay, so wrapping this up, looking at Vance through his actions and his internal thoughts gives us this picture of a really complex individual. Driven by loyalty, yes, but also dealing with impulsivity and this self-identified low agreeableness.
And that mix leads to strong reactions both for and against him, and clearly some significant internal conflict for him too. His style is definitely a break from the traditional VP mold. Less background, more foreground.
More confrontational, certainly.
Which brings us to the really interesting question, given his self-awareness. He knows these are his tendencies.
So how might that awareness actually change his approach going forward? That's the big unknown, isn't it?
It really is. And that leads to our final thought for you, the listener. Considering Vance seems to understand his own, let's call them flaws or tendencies, how might he adapt? Or will he?
And what does it mean long-term to have a vice president with this kind of distinct, sometimes abrasive style, operating on the world stage, but also in domestic politics?
Does that fighter approach ultimately help or hinder the administration's goals? And what about America's relationships abroad?
Definitely a lot to chew on there. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.